I'm Scott Wright, and the winery is Scott Paul Wines. Paul's my middle name. Everybody says, "Are you Scott Paul?" And I just say yes. I gave up explaining that a long time ago. We make Pinot Noir here in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. We have vineyards in the Dundee Hills and Ribbon Ridge and Chehalem Mountains. And then we're also, very uniquely for a winemaker in the U.S., we're also a national importer of over 20 of the top wineries in Burgundy and Champagne. So we have a combination import company and winery all sort of wrapped up into one.
Great. And how long have you been in business?
Made our first wines in 1999, so this will be our 12th harvest this year, I guess. Yeah. And started the import company in 2004.
Okay. Well, let's go back, as you know, we've been talking about to winemakers who've done something else and then moved into winemaking,
right.
Into the wine business and owners. So talk a little bit about your kind of first career and what you started off doing before making wine.
The first career, I was a radio disc jockey. I grew up being in love with top 40 radio. I grew up in Chicago and was fascinated by the guys on WLS and WCFL, the big top 40 stations back in the 60s. And it was just hugely fascinating and interesting to me. And I grew up on the lakefront just south of downtown Chicago, and then my family moved to the south suburbs just before I started high school. And my high school had a radio station in the high school and a 4-year curriculum in broadcasting, which was pretty unheard of and pretty unique at the time. And I discovered that and was very excited to find out it was something I could get into. And so did that all through high school, and then turned out I in addition to having the passion for it, also had some aptitude and some talent, and really explored that through college and then on. And I was one of the lucky ones who was fortunate to have a really nice career in radio, and I made it to the top. I was a nationally syndicated radio personality. I was on in 350 markets around the country for a long time. Had a show called Hitline USA, where we interviewed all the top hit makers of the day and took calls from people and stuff. And I was a radio programmer as well. I programmed radio stations in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and all over the country, and was at one time America's most listened to radio personality when I was on Z100 in New York. I had a weekly audience of several million people, and my radio name was Shadow Stevens back in the day. Not to be confused with the other Shadow Stevens, the guy who was on TV on Hollywood Squares with the long blonde hair and stuff. That wasn't me. I was the radio Shadow Stevens. I stole his name.
So, what are some of the highlights? As you were in the kind of the height of your radio experience, what was the most exciting thing for you about that, and what kind of drew you to it and drew you to keep kind of building a career on that side?
You know, it was always a deep passion for music. Number one, it was very exciting to be just a whole part of the hits industry, so to speak, and pop culture, and loved that. Loved music. I was 10 when the Beatles hit America, and that just like really ignited something inside of me. I remember seeing them on Ed Sullivan and all those historic kind of things, and so that's where it all started. And then the concept of being on the radio to me was just so exciting. People that you heard on the radio when I was growing up in this country in the 60s and the 70s were stars. They were people that everybody knew. And it was not like a TV star or a movie star or anything, but there were significant celebrities, and I've got a face sort of made for radio, so I figured that was maybe my best shot of being part of that celebrity pop culture kind of thing. And I had a fairly decent voice and learned how to translate it into something that people enjoyed on the radio. So I just liked being a part of that whole big entertainment industry kind of thing. And so the radio portion of my career was really exciting, and then I segued into the music industry after having been on the radio and programmed radio stations and been a national executive for radio companies. I'd done pretty much everything I could have done in the radio realm, or anything I was interested in doing anyway. And I had the opportunity to move into the actual music business end of things, and I became a marketing and promotion executive for a major record company, Epic Records, and worked very closely with Celine Dion and Pearl Jam and Michael Jackson and Ozzy Osbourne and all the major artists we had on our label at the time. So that was pretty neat. And then I got to, after I left them, I started a company with a few other partners, and we were independent promotion and marketing consultants for the music industry, and we worked for all the major labels and major artist managers, and got to do some great projects with everybody from the Beatles to Britney Spears and everything in between. And working on the Britney Spears projects was finally got me to realize I needed to get the hell out of the business.
So it seems, so maybe what's a little more about that transition point was, at some point too, you're connecting with wine. So how did your interest in wine first evolve? Is there a certain moment or a situation?
The wine thing started really early when I was in my very early teens, or maybe even before. I grew up with my mom and my stepfather in Chicago, and my stepfather happened to, very unusually for that era, be into really fine food and wine, and in Chicago was a shot in the beer and steak and potato town. But he got turned on to good food and wine fairly early on, and started buying wine and bringing home all sorts of cool stuff. And he was the kind of guy, if he got into something, he got into it deeply. So suddenly we went from just having a nice bottle or two around to building a cellar and having tons of wine and a collection and all that. And so we had good wine on the table every night for dinner, and I was allowed to start tasting it when I was, 11 or 12 or so. And I was fascinated by how all these wines tasted different. And I just sort of got into that, and I always wanted to taste every little thing that he had open. And by the time I was in my mid-teens or so, is when I really realized I had more than a passing interest in it, that there was a passion.
Was there, in the earlier period, was there a certain bottle of wine or a certain experience that really stands out clear where, the lights went on?
The Epiphany bottle, yes. There were actually two. My stepdad was into champagne, first and foremost, and then Burgundy also. So the first bottle that blew my mind was a bottle of 61 Krug champagne. He would bring home all the top champagnes, and for some reason that wine it had I don't know, I mean, I was, 13 or 14 years old. It was like, I don't know, I couldn't really tell you what it was about it, but I knew it was more exciting and interesting to me than anything I'd ever tasted before. So that was the first one, and then the real epiphany was probably a bottle of 1959 Latache, and this was in 1969, and I had an out-of-body experience. Is the only way to describe it. When you have that magical bottle of Burgundy, I was 15 years old, and it was like nothing. It was transcendental. I had never imagined having anything that you could drink or eat or taste that was like that. It transported me somewhere else, and so that's what really ignited the fire.
And you've been in, so your evidence that have stayed with you since that period. So it's kind of in your family heritage and history.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, that's what I was exposed to really young. That's what I had a passion for. That's what I understood as I grew up, and I was able to drink legally and buy wine. Obviously you try all sorts of different stuff, but I kept gravitating back towards the Burgundy and Champagne. Those are my real passions. That's what I understand. And Burgundy I've just always found so captivating, and there's so many layers of things going on with the great wines, and such deep history and endless richness of culture there that, I've been studying it for 30 some years, and you're still constantly learning stuff all the time. So I decided to become a one-trick pony and just focus on what I was really, really into. So that passion for specifically the wines of Burgundy is what fueled my love for wine as things developed over the years, and as my career in radio and records was doing better, I could afford to buy more and more wine and better wine, and started just collecting and buying, and at some point something just, you reach critical mass, and you go from being passionate about wine to being a complete wine geek. And I crossed that line at some point and started spending all my vacations and free time hanging out with winemakers and trying to meet winemakers that I was fascinated by, and pestering them and calling them and emailing them or whatever the mode of communication was at the time.
Was there a moment when you decided, okay, now is the time I need to switch careers? Was there anything that happened or anything that you saw that just made you say, I need to explore this further or see what I can do here?
Yeah, to make a short story long, the music industry and the broadcasting industry, and like many other industries around the same time, was going through huge amounts of consolidation. Everything being bought up by 2 or 3 large multinational corporations, and the whole entrepreneurial spirit and the sense that you were creating something or being part of something you believed in had kind of like disappeared, and the business became about squeezing every nickel to the bottom line for Wall Street every quarter. And so that was less and less interesting to me, and we were getting hired to work on projects that I didn't believe in and wasn't passionate about, and it just wasn't as fun as it used to be. So while this was happening, I was getting deeper and deeper and deeper and into the wine thing, like we were just talking about, and hanging out with winemakers, and something in the back of my mind said, maybe this is something you would want to do someday, but I'd never really fully verbalized that to myself or made myself believe it yet, maybe. But it was some lurking there somewhere. And I can't think of any one specific incident that pushed me over the top. But one day I just realized I was spending more time doing wine-oriented stuff, whether it was going to auctions and buying wine, traveling to visit winemakers, tasting wine, cataloging my wine collection, going to wine tastings with other wine geeks in the industry, that I was doing more of that than I was doing my actual job. So I figured maybe that should tell you something. Maybe it's time to actually go do this. This is what your passion is really all about in your life right now. So at that point I said, okay, let's do it. I went to my partners. I said, I want to get out of here. I want to move up to Northern California, start a winery. I don't know what I want to do, but I want to do something in the wine business. And they talked me out of it. They said, you can't go, business is too good. We all want to leave and go to Napa and start a winery, but blah, 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 we've got jobs to do here and business, blah, blah, blah. So they talked me out of it. So as a substitute for following my dream, I said, okay, well, if we're not going to do that, we're going to buy the big house at the top of the hill we always wanted in LA. So found this house we really loved, bought it, and of course needed to sell the other house to make this deal happen. The hottest real estate market in the history of Southern California, and the only house that's not selling is ours, right? So I'm freaking out, and in the middle of all this, this painting that's sitting here behind me comes into our lives by a very strange set of circumstances. But we bought this painting, and we said, this would be perfect for this big, huge, great room wall we have in this new house we're buying at the top of the hill. And so to make a very long story somewhat shorter, didn't sell our house. I got very sick because I was stressing out about all this. I had 103 fever for weeks, couldn't get out of bed. The doctors didn't know what was wrong. They tested me for Epstein-Barr syndrome and chronic fatigue and all this other stuff. Basically, my doctor said one day, are you just really so upset about something that's going on in your life, or is there a decision you're wrestling with or something? And I said, well, yeah, I wanted to go, start a winery or something, and changed my mind and bought this house instead. He said, I'm not a psychiatrist or anything, but maybe that's it. So driving home from that doctor's appointment is when I really had the realization, yes, I need to do this. He was right. So I went back to my partners and said, hey, you know what, I really am out of here. Let's work something out. I'll consult or do something, but I've got to go. So that was the one point that it happened. The corollary to that story is we were telling the lady we bought this painting from about what was going on, and that we were moving and going to do something in the wine business. And she said, oh, well, that's the meaning of the painting. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, did you notice that the rabbit's arms and legs are bound? And the name of the painting is Rabbit Receiving His Own Information. And I said, no, I've never really paid attention to that. I just liked the way the painting looked. And she said, well, the message of the painting is supposed to be that sometimes it takes being sick or an accident or cancer or something like that to force someone to slow down long enough to listen to their own inner wisdom or the wisdom of the universe or whatever you want to call it, to figure out what path they're on, what they're supposed to be doing. So that's why the painting came into your life when it did, and da-da-da-da. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So that's why we decided to make something based on this rabbit into our logo, and we started the winery. So that all sort of just, it looked like it was meant to be. It all came together.
And so unbeknownst to you, the artist is from?
Yeah, from Oregon. He's apparently from Portland. We we moved up here full time in the beginning of 2001, and I was getting a piece of art framed at a frame shop in Portland. And the framer had mentioned that he was into wine, so I gave him my business card, which has this little rabbit logo thing on it. And the framer goes, "Is that rabbit based on a painting by Cody Bustamante?" And I said, "I think that's the artist's name. I'm not even sure." And he goes, "Oh, he's from Portland, you know." And I said, "No, no idea." He said, "Yeah, he's from here. He painted a series of these big rabbits, and I almost bought one, but I ended up not buying it. But some lady in LA bought it." And I was like, "Oh my God, we bought it from the lady in LA." And so it was very serendipitous. Things just, really started to mesh together. It was like almost, it was rather cosmic in the way it all came together. So
now that it's almost this kind of a spiritual kind of experience.
yeah, very much so.
And then, the region now where you're making wine makes kind of the first wine, the stylistically similar, climate-wise anyway, to some of the wines in Burgundy. So, and you practice the biodynamic farming too. Is that part of the connection too? Is that part of your draw to how you make wine or your philosophy in the wine business?
Yeah, we started the wine arena in California. We were making Chardonnay from the Sonoma coast and Pinot Noir from Pizzoni Vineyard, a cool site down in the Santa Lucia Highlands. We loved the wines that we were making at the beginning. We were lucky enough to just BS our way into some good fruit contracts, and our first few wines ended up coming out really nicely and getting placed in some of the top restaurants in the country. But in my heart and soul, I knew that those weren't the wines I really wanted to make. I wanted to make true, cool climate Pinot. And as we just didn't have access to those sources in California, and I thought our best shot to do it would be here in Oregon. We share virtually an identical climate with Burgundy. The soils are entirely different, but to make the wines that I really believed in, I believe Pinot Noir should be a wine of elegance and finesse and grace, rather than a wine of power and extraction. I think at its best, it's a wine of subtlety and nuance, and I felt that we had to be here, sort of on the fringe of being able to ripen Pinot Noir grapes to make that happen. And so that's what prompted our move to Oregon. We made wine in Oregon and California both for the first couple of vintages, and moved everything here full time starting in 2001.
Oregon's kind of a region that's growing up, I guess, in the wine industry and getting some recognition. Do you think that that's well deserved, or where do you think it is on sort of as a wine region and a region for growing Pinot Noir? How does it rank?
From my perspective, I think it's considered maybe the second best Pinot Noir region in the world outside of Burgundy. I think most people would agree that Burgundy is on its own different level, but they've also had a couple thousand years of trial and error to get their sites dialed in, and we're still just at the beginning. We only have 5 vineyards in the state that are older than 40 years old, so we're really just on the cusp of it happening. But the industry has exploded here. When we started, there were 150 wineries here. Now there's 475 just in the last 10 years. And I think it's pretty much acknowledged amongst people, that are around the wine world on a regular basis that Oregon is a true world-class Pinot Noir wine region. And we're proud and excited of that. They make great Pinot Noir in California too, but it's a different animal. It's a bigger, more powerful, more aggressive, more in-your-face kind of wine, and that's great. That's just one style of Pinot, and I happen to prefer another style, so that's why we're here.
Are there people in the industry here that kind of helped you along or helped get you oriented, or how did you come into Oregon and start doing this? Was there anybody you learned from? Or?
Yeah, I learned from a lot of people. In California, I should definitely mention that I was mentored by a great winemaker, a guy named Greg LaFollette, who was the winemaker at Flowers on the Sonoma coast. And he was one of those guys that I pestered while I was still in the music business, who was kind enough to let me come up, hang out, pull hoses, work harvest, work at the bottling line, and just pepper him with questions. So he kind of convinced me that if I wanted to make wine, that there's no reason that I couldn't. And I come to find out that he has really mentored probably almost everybody in this country who makes Pinot Noir at one time or other. It's sort of like 6 degrees of separation from Greg LaFollette. If you talk to someone who makes Pinot Noir, he taught them or taught the person who taught them. He's a fascinating guy. So I had that mentor mentoring to begin with in California. And then when we moved up here, shortly after we moved here, I met the Drouin family, the people who started and owned Domaine Drouin, Oregon, and they had just parted ways with their general manager, who'd been with them for a long time, and they asked me if I would be interested in managing their winery, which I thought was pretty amazing because I had no experience in the wine industry whatsoever, but a lot of experience in marketing and promotion and this great passion for wine, and had my own little winery that we had really just at that time, made only a few hundred cases of wine each of the first 2-3 vintages. But it was a great opportunity for me to go to work with the Drouins, who have several generations of great Pinot Noir winemaking in their DNA, and so I got the chance to be the GM, the managing director at Domaine Drouin for a few years, and learned so much from Véronique Drouin, who's the winemaker there, and her father Robert, who's one of the great statesmen of the Burgundian wine industry, and her brother Philippe, who runs the vineyards in Burgundy in here. So it really like sort of getting a graduate experience in Pinot Noir winemaking from some of the best in the business. And hopefully I brought a lot of interesting things to them that they didn't have as well, marketing and PR and stuff that wasn't going on there before, and opened the winery to the public for the first time, and started a direct to the public sales program and all that kind of stuff. So it was a good combination. So we were a good team, and so they very kindly allowed me to continue to make my Scott Paul wines and grow that a little bit while I was working there. And then Scott Paul got to the point where it really needed my full-time attention if I was really gonna take it to where I wanted it to go. So I gave the Drouins a year notice, and helped recruit and find my replacement, David Millman, who's another old friend of mine from the music industry. And so I left them in tremendous hands, and so since then I've just been doing this, just head down, full steam ahead. So
you were kind of growing Scott Paul wines. What does the ideal point, or the ideal vision that you have for your business look like?
Well, my winery across the street here that we built in 2006 has a capacity of about 5,500 cases, and so ultimately we would like to probably fill that up with our own production. Right now it's filled between our production and a custom crush client. So at some point over many years, as we acquire more vineyards or more leases or whatever, we'll probably fill it up. Right now we're a 2,500, 3,000 case winery, and can see that maybe growing slowly over a number of years. I don't ever want to be any bigger than that, with the idea that probably at that point you cannot continue to keep your arms around every barrel and stay really in touch with every drop of juice, and you lose a little touch, little hands-on contact with it. And not to say that great wine can't be made in bigger quantities. Domaine Drouin makes 15,000 or more cases of their Willamette Valley Pinot. That's a tremendous wine. But I want to stay small. I want to stay handcrafted. I want to really still be an artisanal producer. Kelly Fox, who's been making the wines with us since 2005, is also of the same mind that she really wants to, be able to really stay personally in touch with literally every drop of juice that's coming through the place. So that's the goal for that. And then we added this import company, which allows us to that we can grow as big as the market will bear. We import these great wines from top producers in Burgundy and Champagne, and then you can taste them here in the tasting room. You can buy them directly from us here and on our website and through our mailing list, but they're also distributed around the country to restaurants and retailers through our distributor network around the country. So that business can grow as big as we can make it.
Is there any kind of reciprocity? What do the French drink any Scott Paul wines, and what are their reaction to?
The winemakers do, yeah. The winemakers are always interested to taste, and the Burgundian winemakers are jealous of the great growing conditions we have here. The differences in our climate is they have humidity and rain, throughout the summer, whereas here it's completely dry in Oregon. So they're fighting rot and mildew and oidium and stuff like that more often than we are. So they're jealous of the very clean and dry growing conditions that we have. They like our wines a lot. They think a lot of American Pinot is too big and too over the top maybe, but they really seem to enjoy the ones that are more more towards our end of the scale, the ones that are a little more about elegance and finesse. And they think there's great potential here. The public in France certainly doesn't drink Oregon Pinot or American wine or whatever. The Europeans tend to drink what's from their local area, and that's about it.
Now, in your case, knowing a little bit about the French industry, there's a lot of, if it's not money, there's also UC Davis trained
Right.
winemakers and wine growers, and then in Europe there's fourth or fifth generation of apprenticeship, and it starts very young, and here you come kind of later on in the game.
Yeah.
And to get involved with it, what gave you the confidence or that you can go in and compete at that same level?
I don't know. I think it's maybe purely naivete. Just believing that you can just get out there and do it, the American spirit maybe. I've always believed in myself a lot and thought that I could do anything I put my mind to. I've kind of subscribed to the philosophy of a leap and the net shall appear. And so far the net's been there because we just jumped in with both feet and we're still here. So far so good, as they say. No, I had a passion, I had a very specific vision of what I wanted to do, and I wasn't going to let anything take me off of that vision. I just wanted to make wines that I wanted to drink, and figured we'd find a few other people who might share those kind of sensibilities, and we'll be okay. But no, I have no formal training other than working with a bunch of great winemakers and getting to hang around them and learning by osmosis. Kelly Fox has an immense amount of training, so she's much more technically focused than I am, but neither of us believe that you can look at winemaking as intellectually. It's more of an emotional, spiritual kind of thing, and so we approach it hedonistically rather than technically.
So what was the biggest challenge after making this transition? Were there any moments where you thought, because here you are in a sort of stressful situation in the music industry, and were there any points where you thought, what did I get myself into, or economic challenges or anything like that?
I've never thought, what did I get myself into, except for maybe when you look at the balance sheet and you see all the debt that's on there sometimes. But fortunately, we've been very lucky and have built a fairly robust business and have a nice connection with our consumers. We always started from the beginning to focus this company on selling as much as we could direct to the consumer, and we certainly sell a lot of wine through distribution, so we're in restaurants and retail shops in key markets around the country as well, but we really wanted to be focused on the end user, on the customer, and we're lucky enough to have good word of mouth on the internet in the early days and build a nice mailing list, and so we have a lot of passionate customers around the country who've been with us since the beginning, and that continues to grow. And we never had a public facility until we opened this place in 2006, so that's relatively new, and now more people discover us. So again, knock on wood, that part of the things has been going well, but it's the wine business and vineyards are definitely a black hole when it comes in terms of investment and capital, and so you have to take a long-term view. We knew going in this wasn't going to be a quick turnaround. We didn't know maybe it was going to be as slow as it is, but nonetheless, things are looking good. We're fortunate to all of us who are involved in this company have a long-term vision and a long-term understanding that's really the way this business works. And we're doing it out of passion. We're building, hopefully, a strong brand that really stands for something. And with the quality of the product being the only consideration that has ever gone into any decision that we've made, that comes first, and everything else has to follow that. And as long as we stay true to that, I think we'll be okay.
So it sounds like almost an opposite mindset from what you were experiencing in the music industry.
Yeah, the early days of the music industry was all about, somebody would get excited and find this amazing artist that no one had ever heard of called Bruce Springsteen and allow him to make 2 or 3 albums that nobody ever really heard and let something build and grow. Nowadays, it's, signing whatever piece of garbage you can ram through the system real quickly and hopefully get people to download a few times and then move on to the next thing. So, yeah, it became, I'm hopefully back in the wine industry to where we were in the early days of radio and records, and that's building something you really believed in real passion and spirit behind it.
Is there anything that you miss, like kind of looking back, that that you don't get to experience anymore?
Only just being backstage with all the stars at all the good shows all the time. That was a nice perk. I had a lot of friends who were artists, and you know, they would invite me to go on the road with them, and I would live on the tour bus with bands and stuff, and a lot of crazy stories from those days.
And any highlights from those stories that stand out?
Not that I can tell in public. No, it's just the highlights would be just, you know, meeting amazing people. You know, at one time or other, you guys is trying to get in. I think we locked him in.
Okay. You rolling okay there?
Sorry about that. At one time or other, I met all four of the Beatles. That was pretty amazing to be able to sit down one-on-one with Paul McCartney and John Lennon, no, I had the great fortune of you know, getting to meet, and in some cases getting to know a lot of major personalities in the music industry, some of whom had been heroes to me since I was a kid. So that was pretty neat. I've maintained friendships with some of them. Very bizarre spectrum of artists. Bret Michaels from Poison was in our wedding. I mean, you know, he's actually a really sweet, great guy, and so yeah, it's. But do I miss anything? Not really. The perks of the rock star lifestyle maybe a little bit, but you know, the perks in this business are pretty good as well. We eat and drink exceedingly well, and it's a rough job, but somebody's got to do it, and I'm glad it's us.
Did you? Let's see. What about? I just had it on the top of my head.
You mentioned biodynamics before. If you'd like to get into that a little bit.
Biodynamics, yeah. Actually, what was your path to getting involved with the biodynamic process? You know, some folks will say it's sort of a snake oil or kind of voodoo type process, but it's growing in popularity. And what attracted you to that?
You know, I'd started reading that a lot of the most famous and top producers in Burgundy had been dabbling in it or converted to it, and people who have an immense amount of respect, whether it's Dominique Lafont or Antoine Leflèvre, or the people at Romain Conti or Michel Lafarge. And so you start thinking, well, there's got to be something to it. These are very intelligent people, and they make fascinating wines. And while I was at Drouhin, Philippe Drouhin, who was in charge of the vineyards for the Drouhin family, both in Burgundy and here in Oregon, was seeing the same thing. I said, okay, well, you know, we have a huge estate here in Burgundy, hundreds and hundreds of acres. Maybe we should experiment with a little of this. And he is the most unspiritual, romantic kind of person. He's very black and white, very technical. He's not a romantic wine grower. He's a scientist. And so he said, okay, we will make an experiment, and we will do some acres this way and see how it goes. And for him to have been blown away to see how the health of the vineyards had improved, and the balance in the plants and the quality of the fruit that was coming off of his vineyards that he had tried biodynamics with, just in the space of a couple of years, where he expected it to take even much longer than that, was amazing, because again, he has no romantic notion about this. He was seeing black and white results. So he decided to convert almost all of the Drouhin parcels in Burgundy to biodynamics shortly thereafter. And I think, well, if this guy is really seeing that there's something there, that there's really got to be something to it. So when I was in Burgundy, while I was still working at Drouhin, I got to attend meetings of some of the groups of the biodynamic wine growers over there. Some of those people we just mentioned, and others who they get together on a regular basis and compare notes on what they're doing. Because biodynamics is not an exact recipe or science. That there's a lot of wiggle room in all the things that are in there. So people are trying different variations of it, and they get together and they'll do experiments in their vineyards. They'll do a couple rows spraying the spray at sunrise, and a couple rows spraying at sunset, and see if that makes a difference. You know, all these different permutations of it. And so I was able to be in a little bit of that, and I found that really fascinating. So I just came to the decision that when we have vineyards here in Oregon, that we either plant ourselves or have the opportunity to farm ourselves. I wanted to try it. So we were very fortunate to be able to lease 7.5 acres of Marsh Vineyard up in the Dundee Hills, which was planted in 1970. It's Oregon's 5th oldest vineyard, and one of the few with really mature vines. And so we have a lease on those 7.5 acres, which means we have complete control over it. We farm it with our own people and our own equipment. So 4 years ago, we made the switch to biodynamics up there, and then we planted our first estate vineyard here 4 years ago as well, and started that biodynamic from the ground up. We planted actually biodynamically grown starts for our vines there. And biodynamics as a whole, yeah, is there a little voodoo? Is there some snake oil? Probably. What's at the root of it? It's making you be a better farmer. It's making you be in your vineyards more, paying more attention to each plant. And the goal is to have those vines, those plants, those living things work in harmony with nature than against it, or to just treat anything that's going on there prophylactically with nasty chemicals. And it's a homeopathic, plant growing is what it is, and it's having your plants and the place that they're planted in harmony with nature. And there are natural forces at nature and work, the forces that move the tides in and out, the forces that make some plants grow tall and straight, the forces that make some plants grow up low and wide, and you try and work with those. And I don't profess to understand all of it or much of it, but I've seen it in action, and I know it's got to be better than driving through your vineyards with a tractor spraying a bunch of nasty chemicals. They found in Burgundy in the 60s and 70s during that better living through chemistry era that, you won't have any more problems, you'll have no pests, you'll have no more rot, you'll have bigger yields, but they killed the soils and the wine sucked for about 15 or 20 years there. They did soil analyses and they found, you should pick up a handful of that dirt and there should be millions of living organisms in there, and it was completely dead. They had just to move towards organics in Burgundy and then towards biodynamics as well. And now the vast majority of the high quality producers in Burgundy are either organic or biodynamic. It's pretty amazing, and they're seeing results in the wine.
What different did you notice differences in your wines as you moved into that, or that you trace to that, or?
Not really, and I don't know if it's anything that is traceable yet. We'd only made wine from Marsh Vineyard for a year or two before we were purchasing fruit from that vineyard before we were able to actually lease it and then start farming it ourselves. And it was being farmed essentially organically before we started farming it ourselves. And so now this is just the 4th year of it being biodynamic, so I don't know if that is soon enough to really see any difference in the wine. And the differences you do see in the wines from biodynamic vineyards tend to be so hard to explain. It's almost an imperceptible thing, but it's a vibrancy, it's a life that you tend to find in the wines that maybe is not there if you're farming it conventionally. But it's a very ethereal kind of thing. I don't think there's any real concrete black and white. But if I put a wine in front of a bunch of people and one was biodynamic and one wasn't, you might like the one up more than the other, and you may not even be able to articulate why. It's a very subtle thing.
And I have some questions about family. What does this move? Your daughter was not even born, or very young. You were living in California, you and your wife. And what has this change meant on your family? Is there any additional strain that's running an agricultural business or anything like that? Or?
No, it's been a family affair, and we have a business partner as well, and he and his wife are also very passionate about what we're doing. They're not actively involved on a regular basis, but no, there hasn't been a strain on the family. It's been something that we've all been kind of rallied behind, and it's really become who we are. This is our life. This is our company. Our daughter is quite often out here. On Saturdays, if we're having an open house or a sales event, and sometimes she's out, greeting the customers on the floor, or just in the back working on the computer. She works the sorting line during Crush every year, and has just grown up around it, and loves to taste wine. She's already a champagne junkie like her dad.
So
But no, there hasn't been any family strain that I would point to. I think everybody's pretty passionate and excited about the fact that this is what we do. It's pretty neat.
now, what about, you mentioned that there's this explosion of wineries in Oregon. A lot of people are looking to get into it. Some, it's just a hobby. Some succeed and fail. But if somebody's at that point where they're thinking, hey, I might like to do this, and maybe I should start thinking about it, what would you say to them?
Don't do it. No, not at all. I would say if it's your passion and you feel like you couldn't go another day in your life without doing it, then you've got to do it. And that's kind of the way I felt. I was just driven to do it. You have to be willing to give it your all. It's not something you can just sort of dabble in, unless you have more money than God and you just want to do. If you don't ever care about making money at it, that's a different thing. And you see a lot of that, especially in Napa, I think, where a lot of Silicon Valley instant multimillionaires, they've already bought the Ferrari and the house in the south of France. What else are you going to do? Okay, so you start a vineyard, but that didn't come out of maybe real passion and dedication to handcrafting wine. They hire a high-end consultant and try and make 99-point wines for Robert Parker, and that's all good, but that's a whole different business. That's not the one that we're in. But no, if you have the real passion to make wine, there's no reason you can't do it. You just have to be willing to, again, give it your all, and that really means your all your resources, mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, whatever you got. You got to leave it all out on the playing field.